in honor of Senator John McCain's passing. So why the back and forth and up and down? Well, this morning we have new details about why President Trump initially refused to praise Senator McCain or even mention that he was a six-term senator and a Republican presidential nominee and a POW who endured 5.5 years of captivity and torture. The Wall Street Journal reports the president felt the television coverage of McCain's passing was, quote, over the top and more befitting a president. But President Trump did ultimately cave to pressure from Congress, veterans groups, and members of his own staff. So yesterday afternoon, he released a statement saying he respects McCain's service to the country and ordered the flag to remain at half-staff until McCain is buried. The president also appeared on camera last night saying he appreciated, quote, everything McCain has done for the country.
We'll play that for you in a little bit. Also getting new details about the ceremonies to honor John McCain. His colleagues in the Senate remembered him draping his desk in black, placing white flowers on that desk. We know former Presidents Obama and Bush will deliver eulogies. The president also has asked Vice President Mike Pence to make remarks at the Capitol Memorial. But this morning, the focus is on the fallen senator's final words in a letter read by longtime aide Rick Davis. McCain encouraged Americans to unite around the ideals that connect them rather than focus on divisions. And in a pretty clear rebuke on the president, McCain pointedly asked Americans to tear down walls rather than build them.
Okay, so let's bring in Michael Bender. He's the White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal who broke the story about the president's apparent disgust with the TV coverage of Senator McCain's death and his change over to praising him. Mike, thanks so much for being here. So let's talk about the chronology of how this all happened. The president started the day yesterday. It sounds like pretty dug in that he didn't want to say anything particularly nice about John McCain. Then what happened?
Yeah, that's right. It was the second day that White House officials were trying to urge him to say some kind words about the former Senator McCain and to sign this proclamation that would keep the flags lowered for more than just the 2 days that are required under the flag code. And then, as you mentioned earlier, the president saw the wall-to-wall coverage of his decision. And I was in the White House yesterday. He refused repeated attempts to say something nice about John McCain, which just fueled the coverage on a day when the White House thought it had some pretty good news to share, which was a trade agreement in principle with Mexico. Finally, it was, from what I'm told, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, who stayed on the president and repeatedly urged him to sign this proclamation, and it wasn't until yesterday afternoon that the flag was lowered after it had been raised earlier in the day.
Okay, so that's very interesting, Mike, about Sarah Sanders being instrumental in here, because, you know, to be honest, so people in the media and the public often question what her influence is and her role is, and if she does have any powers of persuasion over the president. So can you tell us more about your reporting that it really was she, more than Chief of Staff John Kelly, more than the VFW influence that had also called the president?
Well, that's what my reporting is, and it was Sarah is in the room quite a bit. She's become a trusted advisor to the president. I'd be careful to say anyone has sort of influence over the president, right? This is a White House that is clearly run and on the president's decision making, and no one is really making decisions in there other than him. But you know, in the year or so that Sarah's been press secretary and has had a lot more of a communications role than a lot of her predecessors. She's in the room quite a bit. We see her at the table and during cabinet meetings. She's become a very influential with the president. And I think the other thing to remember here too is she was pretty outspoken on Senator McCain's passing as well, and retweeting a note from Senator McCain's daughter. Sarah, of course, is a daughter of a prominent politician, so I think she sees you know, some parallels there and appreciates how a father is treated in politics. So I think she had a very clear focus and understanding of what this moment meant, and repeatedly expressed that to the president over the last couple of days.
I want to read just a portion of that statement that finally came out by President Trump after so much pressure. Here's the beginning of it. Despite our differences on policy and politics, I respect Senator John McCain's service to our country, and in his honor have signed a proclamation to fly the flag of the United States at half-staff until the day of his interment. It's not typical sort of Trumpian language and syntax, if Twitter is any indication. Who crafted that statement?
It's a good question. I'm told that those are the president's words. I think there's some light editing that goes on in the White House with all of these statements, but he is he's very involved in these statements and dictates almost all of them that come out under his name. And again, I'm told by several people that this again is his statement. And he's to the point where the punctuation in this statement is where he wanted it. The commas and the periods are at the order of the president on this statement. That's
very interesting, because sometimes his punctuation is questionable, unique on Twitter, but also just that. What I believe you're reporting is that he felt very strongly about starting with, despite our differences on policy and politics. He didn't want to gloss over that they had a lot of differences and, in fact, acrimony. He wanted to start with that and then go into the kinder part of the statement.
Yeah, I think there's no ignoring that, and that's part of the problem, or part of the reason, at least, that this took 2 days to get done. And the battles between the president and Senator McCain are weighed very heavily on the president's mind, even in death.
Okay, Mike Bender, thank you very much for sharing your reporting with us. Really interesting.
Okay. All right, let's get reaction. Once again, David Gregory joins us, as well as senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg News and CNN political analyst Margaret Talev, also new Harvard fellow Margaret Talev. I wanted to congratulate you. Allison.
I was like, Harvard. We get enough of that.
It was important to me to say congratulations. Man of the people, David Gregory, joining us from Nantucket. Margaret, I want to ask you.
I am in Washington, D.C. this morning.
All right. Thank God you got the private jet down there. Margaret, I want to ask you, because you and your Bloomberg colleagues, they were on the phone. You guys were on the phone all yesterday, learning the reaction, I think, from voters out there, from people, to what was going on. And you got a sense of the pressure that the president must have felt by yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, my colleagues on the Hill and our White House team reaching out to congressional offices as part of trying to understand what was happening. And these offices were being flooded by complaints from voters who were very upset at the way the president had handled things and about the flag issue. And then, of course, you saw what happened with veterans organizations, including the American Legion. When you have veterans organizations going out of their way to put the president in a box and Republican congressional offices being flooded with phone calls, you have a problem. And it is a problem that the White House aides had seen coming for days, all throughout the weekend. I was in the pool vans over the weekend while the president was in Virginia at his golf club, and just waiting for that official White House statement. Why hasn't the White House statement come yet? And we began to understand yesterday kind of the etymology of why this had become so complicated, and yet how clear the pressure was for the president to just set the tensions aside and do what would normally be done for a lawmaker of this sort of VIP national status.
Yeah, David Gregory, it doesn't take a crystal ball to see this one coming. I mean, of course the American Legion, of course constituent. John McCain was in some ways, a class of his own. You know, he was not your everyday senator that might squabble with the president. And the fact that the president was so terribly tone deaf on this, I mean, sometimes his instincts obviously are right on and appeal to voters in a really deep way, and sometimes they're off kilter. And so yesterday was one of those, and it is fascinating to see behind the scenes how many people had to appeal to him to say something kind about John McCain.
Right. Well, look, this is just a self-imposed controversy, a self-imposed mistake once again, born out of the president's insecurity, his self-indulgence with regard to his temper, and it shows you how he went out of his way to ignore his top aides who said, you know, you can't do this. You gotta do the right thing here, because it's not about him. It's about the presidency. The office of the presidency requires, you are duty bound to honor a figure like John McCain, whose service to the country, whose patriotism, whose statesman-like qualities are in many ways presidential, as the president complained about, because he was a towering figure in the Senate, in our national life, He was the Republican nominee for president. So all of those things are so obvious. And, you know, here's the other thing. The president didn't have to diminish the fact that they didn't agree, and he's not going to be seen as a sellout by his stalwart supporters by being gracious in McCain's death. It's what's required of our national life. It's what we, you know, aspire to see in our national leaders, that they can show some level of decorum and graciousness, especially in these moments.
Let's play what he finally did say last night at the White House. He was with a meeting of evangelical leaders, a dinner that had been planned for some time, and finally, 2.5 days later,